Part of the allure of reusable rockets, I think, is just how futuristic they are. Imagine a rocket that can not only fly to space, but also land back down and be flown again. It's like something from a sci-fi movie. So in this part, we'll be looking at the future of aerospace and the almost certainly decisive role that reusable rockets will likely play in the future. Who will the big players in this future industry be? And if you wanted to get involved, how could you? But first up, where's space going in the future? Well, almost always there are big, ambitious goals put out by different companies and agencies. You might have heard the phrase, nuclear fusion is always 30 years away. It's a phrase that's said by scientists and engineers saying, nuclear fusion's always 30 years away. There's always a 10-year delay every 10 years. And a similar thing is true for spaceflight. Big goals and big ambitions and big targets always have optimistic deadlines. Elon Musk first announced the Falcon Heavy rocket in 2011, and he suggested it would fly sometime in 2013. When the first rocket of that type launched in early 2018, lots of people remembered this 5-year gap and certainly are thinking about applying it to other SpaceX endeavors in the future. This said, despite the fact there will always be delays, there are, at this moment, so many different companies and emerging agencies and emerging private industries that even if some are doomed to fail, there will be, at the very least, some remarkable achievements and some remarkable goals that succeed. So, we've talked about SpaceX and their crazy ideas and their crazy pace of development before, but it's not just them. It's not just Elon Musk's crazy vision of the future who are announcing big plans. NASA has the Mars 2020 rover planned to be the most exploratory of any Martian probe yet. The Indian Space Research Organisation, ISRO, has a shuttle-like reusable vehicle planned for the near future. Of course, Blue Origin has plans to upscale their Shepard rocket into the New Glenn, which is a super heavy lift booster. And Virgin Galactic has plans to push their space plane tourism vehicle even further and into real space, past the edge of space. So certainly there are a few big plans going on. And really the main direction that space is going in the future is outwards. I mean, it's always been like this. First, people were saying, let's put a man in space. Then they were saying, let's put a man on the moon. And now, of course, we're saying, put men back in space, put men back on the moon, and put men on Mars. Or women. We're not discriminatory nowadays. So, SpaceX has plans for a lunar mission on their Starship, Big Falcon spaceship, Big Falcon rocket, BFR plan for the moon. They have constructed large parts of this rocket and they are planning that sometime in 2023 they will send 6 to 8 artists around the moon in this Starship. And that trip could take as long as a week. It would be a remarkable achievement if it were to happen, because of course we have already sent people to the moon, but that was 50 years ago. Things have changed, technology has changed, politics has changed. And if a private agency were to do that, that would revolutionize the space industry. So, what from there? Well, the big goal is Mars. That's SpaceX's big goal. And that is also NASA's big goal. They've recently announced that they are absolutely committed to this. 100% absolutely committed to sending astronauts to the surface of Mars. Simply because, well, probes, we don't get them back. We just send them to Mars, they do their science, and then usually they die due to sand, or they run out of power, or any number of things happen to them. But people obviously need to come back to Earth. So when they come back to Earth, they can bring samples with them. And a sample return from the surface of Mars in many different areas, as well as having people on Mars, would be a gigantic, phenomenal achievement. Even if it's not a reusable rocket that launches them there, it would still be a huge advancement for science and for aerospace. And it would massively increase public interest, which is critical to public agencies because that's how they are funded. Public interest means more money for people like NASA, people like the ISRO, or the European Space Agency, ESA. So, That's really the direction where spaceflight is going. Reusable rockets will play a big part in this, because if rockets are reusable, then NASA can launch more rockets if they really need to. If they have, let's say, they only have enough money to launch one rocket a year currently, there's really no way they could build a big spaceship in space and fly it to Mars with that kind of launch ability. But if they could launch 10 rockets a year, if the price of launches dropped so much that they could launch 10 a year, then they could build this thing in under a year and then send it to Mars and all would be good. So having these reusable rockets is something that will rapidly increase the pace of development. And that's how it will influence where space is going to travel in the future. Now, as for who the big players will be, that's an interesting question, because it's not very simple. Now, when it comes to something like smartphones, the people who do it first are the people who are going to do it best. They're going to be the most established, people are going to like them more, and I'm thinking about Apple here. When they introduced the iPhone, they pretty much established themselves as the market leader for smartphones for many decades to come. They are still to this day. And that's a big deal. So we can apply this to aerospace. Let's say the market leader, the people who first come out with these reusable rockets, are going to be the market leader later. So that would be SpaceX and Blue Origin. Really would be the two main reusable rocketry market leaders in the future. But this is aerospace. It doesn't always work that way. Because remember, we're not talking about smartphones, a consumer product. We're talking about rockets. Things that cost 100,000 times more. Things that are 100,000 times as big and have 100,000 times the impact on our lives and companies and markets and public interest in space, which is such an important factor. It's likely that Blue Origin and SpaceX will be leaders in reusable rocketry. It's likely that NASA will maintain their lead as well when it comes to government agencies, but other agencies like Canada's space agency, called the CSA, will possibly lose their lead as public interest in space in these democracies starts to decline. Nations like China are focusing their efforts more and more towards space. And that is something that really can't be ignored in any sense either, because China is an up-and-coming power, as many people would know, and their economic power and their immediate control of the government over these corporations that would produce these rockets is something that provides them immense power. And so government agencies within China that launch rockets will likely be very powerful and very influential in future space climates, and might even become a real competitor for NASA. Big players could really be anyone at this point. It's too early to call, but it's likely going to be SpaceX, who are partnered in some degree with NASA, China possibly, and other minor government space agencies, and minor private companies like Virgin Galactic and Blue Origin, who have not really achieved minor things, but they are unlikely to beat out SpaceX's immense lead. As for non-reusable systems, I suspect they will be edged out of the market, but they won't die. There's no way you can effectively kill these non-reusable systems. They have many, many advantages. And of course, they've been used for 50 years. So companies that launch non-reusable rockets probably will stick around for a bit. And they'll still be used and they will still get business, but reusable rocket companies will be where the real growth is. So, how could somebody coming into this industry actually make a difference? How can you even get into this industry? How can you make a difference to the future of this? First up, you can just get involved. The best thing, if you want to find, I'm talking to the listener here especially, if you really want to get involved in something, find people who also want to get involved in it. This is the most important part of anything. If you want to get involved in weaving, find a group of people who weave. If you want to get involved in space, find a group of people who are interested and engaged in space. Because they will know things that you don't, and you will know things that they don't, and you can all cooperate and learn together. And that's really the most important thing. But additionally, as companies like NASA's budget grows, and as companies like SpaceX and Blue Origin increase their capacity and their require for workers, it's likely that they will require workers. They need specialized industrialists, specialized workers, welders, electronic engineers, software engineers, many, many different kinds of people, marketing people. So if there is a desire for space in the public, then there will be a much larger pool for these companies to pull from, and they will choose people who are most interested in their job. People who are interested in space will inherently be more desirable for companies that work with aerospace companies, because that is something that provides a good work ethic and provides, some motivation to come to work every day, right? It just makes sense. Additionally, it would appear that there is still a small region for startups to happen. Now, it seems a bit strange at this point. Obviously, there were well-established private companies, but there aren't actually that many private rocketry companies that are doing big things. We have Rocket Lab, US and New Zealand company. We have SpaceX, Blue Origin, Virgin Galactic, and lots of smaller companies like Copenhagen Suborbitals, who are crowdfunded and plan to send a person on a suborbital trajectory with a crowdfunded rocket, which is crazy. But anyway, there is still space for little startups. If a small satellite company startup began now, it's entirely possible that under the right leadership, it could become a market leader for its area, simply by exploiting and manipulating the way that these reusable rockets are used. Another reusable rocketry company could pop up, could be founded today and still become an absolute market leader or a market researcher. Even a reusable rocketry company could be founded today and could successfully operate and eventually become a real powerhouse. So it certainly appears to be a growing industry, something that has so much potential, and even well-established agencies like NASA, which have been around for 60 years, they still have not got a full control over the area because they are, of course, a government agency, and government agencies are prone to a lot of discrepancy sometimes. Anyway, people who would want to be a part of this industry simply have to get involved, come into up-and-coming agencies, start up-and-coming companies, join established ones, and then try to improve them further. Because the name of the game here is improvement. Because all systems here are still in their infancy. That is in fact, the key of this course, is that all of these systems are still in their infancy and can still be improved. None of them are perfect by any means. Some of them are very good, but none of them are perfect. That's really what's going to go down in the future. A lot of things, essentially. It's, of course, incredibly hard to establish what's going on. I will usually say to my friends, there is no way that we can predict what's going to happen. It's simply, you can never expect it. But we can have some idea, and that idea is very interesting at this point. It doesn't look like the space industry is going to collapse. It doesn't look like this area is going to decline in growth. It looks like it's going to start developing and start flourishing properly as an industry. So, that's all for this part. In the next part, we'll probably be wrapping up, talking about everything we've learned, some reviewing, some looking back, and, what more you can do, where you can go from here. Google stuff, look at stuff, everything. It's going to be awesome. So, I'll see you then. Goodbye.